A lot of times when you have a system that's in place and it's actually working, taking that entrepreneur out of the system and letting the system actually work and actually go forward will allow you to be able to grow and scale from that standpoint.
This is the Staying Power Podcast, a show that explores the challenges business owners face as they grow. I'm Brandon Hall.
And I'm Thomas Castelli.
And together we ask the tough questions to show you that running a business is not for the faint of heart. But if you have staying power, you'll overcome your challenges and achieve lasting success.
In today's episode, we're joined by Dan Handford. Dan has an extensive background in starting multiple seven-figure businesses from scratch, including a large group of non-surgical orthopedic medical clinics located in South Carolina. His family company has an annual budget in excess of $10 million. But that's not all. Dan's also founder of the Multifamily Investor Nation, where he educates a nationwide group of over 9,000 members and how to invest in multifamily assets, and owns a private equity real estate company that acquires multifamily properties called PassiveInvesting.com.
I love that .com, that domain name. That is awesome. PassiveInvesting.com. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the various challenges that Dan faced when building his business empire and how he was able to replace himself as a CEO of his medical clinics and allow him the time to go and build this real estate empire out on the side.
Absolutely. That was one of the, I think, Dan Handford in many ways has a lot of very good business chops. And I think that was one of the very interesting things he did. He was able to build up his company in a way that allowed him to step down as CEO. And now he can focus his time in his real estate business, which allows him to qualify as a real estate professional, something we talk about a lot on the Real Estate CPA podcast. And now he can take advantage of the tax benefits, the very strong tax benefits of doing it.
Yeah. And one of the ways that he kind of allowed himself to step into the CEO role and then above the CEO role, like replace himself as CEO and focus on the real estate. One of the things that we talk about in this episode is the training that he implemented and how systematic he was. Actually, Tom and I, we listened to this episode and we immediately went back to our CPA firm and we were like, hey, we need to do this level of training. So definitely pay attention to that section.
Absolutely. All right. And we're just going to jump right into it. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Would you be able to give our listeners a little information on your background?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Brandon, for having me on. Looking forward to sharing with your audience here. And as far as my background, I'll just kind of give you it briefly. And if you want me to dive into a little more detail, I can. But I'm a chiropractor by trade. So I graduated chiropractic college in December of 2010. Prior to going into chiropractic college, I had a couple of businesses that kind of got me to the point of wanting to go into chiropractic college. Once I graduated chiropractic college, I started off with my first chiropractic clinic and then quickly morphed those into a group of medical clinics, oddly enough. We don't do any chiropractic anymore, but they're all medical clinics. And even while I was in chiropractic college, I started a business that allowed me to start my first chiropractic clinic first off when I got out of school, debt-free. And even to this day, I have these 4 medical clinics that are continuing to cash flow for me and produce really nice revenues. But my wife and I own those together, and we have no debt on them, which is really great. But obviously, it wasn't one of those things where I just woke up one night and it just happened to be there and just appeared, right? It takes a lot of work and effort to kind of put the businesses together, and you have those ups and downs. And looking forward to sharing some of those with you today.
Awesome. From what we understand, we've spoken to you before you came on and gave an excellent keynote on the Tax and Legal Summit, which we loved. And it seems like you were an entrepreneur your entire career. How did that end up happening?
Well, I would say that, my mom always told me, she said, you've been an entrepreneur and a negotiator ever since you were born. Like when you came out, you were negotiating with the doctor on which butt cheek to actually slap, So it's been kind of comical about, that piece of it. But all throughout, I can remember I've had that entrepreneurial bent to me, and selling candy bars and cutting grass and doing pressure cleaning, and also going into high school selling Cutco knives and going through that whole process, and then right out of school started my first business, my first true business. Where we actually had a supplement business that went under. We went south because of a bad partnership. And then I started another business that was a web design, web hosting, networking, and design company. And then got into chiropractic college from there because I was actually designing a website for a chiropractor and then got really interested in chiropractic from that standpoint.
So you've built these medical clinics out. How large is your team now?
Right now, we have just under 50 employees.
50 employees. That's incredible. Do you have like a leadership team at all, or what does the structure look like?
Yes. So it's oddly enough, earlier on, I didn't. It was really just me and then everybody else underneath me, right? And as I continued to grow and scale, it was very hard to do that. And so I had to start to put in some, people in place and in the hierarchy, if you will, or the chain of command. And so right now, I'm the president of the company. I actually don't do a lot of the day-to-day operations, but right underneath me, I have a CEO who is the one who runs all of the day-to-day operations, and I check in with him. He's my only main point person. And then from there, he has a couple of people underneath him from the billing side, from the billing department. We have what's called our practice support center, which handles all the incoming marketing leads and new patient influx and things like that in the marketing. And then the other side is going to be the clinics, where he's actually direct with all of the direct office managers, if you will, or practice managers at each one of the clinics. And then from there, the clinic, all the managers have people underneath them that are actually being managed from those people. So I feel like we have a really good chain of command in place. It was hard to put it in place at first because everybody was used to communicating directly with me. And then when I had to put these different key players in place, it was very hard because people still wanted to come to me. But even if I knew the answer, I wasn't going to answer their question, and I'd have them go to the person that they were supposed to be going to in the chain of command. And one of the other things we've started to, maybe it started, but we've been since the very beginning training our staff to do is there's a chain of command in place for a reason, but that chain of command is there for you to go up one level to the person that's above you, but it also allows you to go laterally to the person next to you in the chain of command to be able to help get some guidance and feedback. So to give you a quick example, we obviously have front desk people in each one of the offices. Well, that front desk person could go directly up, right, to her manager to ask a question, or she could go laterally to another office that has a front desk person, ask that front desk person for some advice or a question on something. And so we were trying to make sure that everybody has that ability to be able to communicate with each other and putting systems in place to be able to affect that.
That's awesome. I know that we've experienced some challenges when initially putting in the hierarchy, because everybody was used to reporting to Brandon, and it's when you go and make that transition, it doesn't just happen overnight. Even though you could set it all up and make that happen, there are some challenges. How long did it end up taking you to finally make that transition from the point where you implemented the hierarchy to the point where it was working as it was intended to work?
I mean, I would say it was a good probably 3 or 4 months before it was completely finalized and transitioned over. Because in the very beginning, when I first put that chain of command in place, I didn't even think about, people needing to come directly to me and things like that. So I had to, put some additional thought process behind, all right, being very deliberate of people coming to me saying, I know the answer to your question, but I'm not going to answer it for you because you need to go talk to this person or that person. And if they don't know the answer to it, they can come to me. And that way there's only a few people that are reporting to me, because for a while there, I was in the CEO position. So I had my chief operating officer reporting to me. I had the billing and the PSC and all these different people, 4 or 5 different heads of the departments reporting directly to me. And right now I'm just the president, right? So I only have one person that's really reporting to me, even though I have a corporate directors meeting once a month with my corporate team that allows them to be able to have that direct access to me. I have that meeting on purpose to have that one-on-one with them as they need. And it allows me to continue to still make sure that the vision that I had for the practices continue to move forward as well.
So on that note, you were talking about how people will keep coming to you because you're the CEO. They've built a relationship with you over time. How do you redirect that relationship? That's a challenging thing to do. Like if you've got a small team and you're scaling it, and especially if you're scaling quickly and you've built a relationship with all of these people, and then all of a sudden you go, no, don't come talk to me. Go talk to Tom. How do you set that conversation up so that person doesn't feel like you're just passing them off, or maybe that the relationship isn't damaged at the end of the day?
Well, I think that at the same time, you have to be careful with relationships in business as well, because I know a lot of business owners that I get caught up with having too much of a relationship where it becomes more of a personal relationship more than a business relationship. And I was very, very fastidious in the very beginning to make sure that my relationships with my employees and my staff, and my team were all business relationships. So I never really had a really deep personal relationship with any of them. And so it wasn't as challenging as I thought it was going to be in the very beginning, because I knew that this is what had to happen if we wanted to continue to grow and scale. And that's how I presented it to our team. Is I said, listen, the reason why we're putting this chain of command in place is because if we're going to effectively run this business like a true business, I am not going to be able to continue to answer all your questions because I don't have all the time in the world to be able to do that. I have to be able to continue to focus on the growth aspect and the vision of what we have for this practice. And of course, I laid out that entire vision for them so they can see where my vision was and so they can get on board with it. But I don't think I really had any team members that were, upset about it. They just kind of understood that this chain of command is in place because it wasn't like we didn't have a chain of command before, right? It was just that it was a singular chain of command. Everybody came to me. And so being able to kind of put some other people in place, did we lose a few people because of it? Because they didn't want to be under that one person or two? I'm sure we did. It's been several years since that actually happened, but probably a good 6 or 7 years since we put that chain of command in place. But you are going to have some attrition when some of that stuff happens, but usually those people are the people that are, usually going to be the weaker people on your team anyway, that probably should have needed to go, but they didn't because you had too much of a relationship with them from the very beginning.
And so we've talked with other guests on this podcast about communication issues with managers. And, as you add these layers in this chain of command, just disseminating information down and getting other people to solve their problems together rather than having to involve you. So talk to us a little bit about how you ensure that there's streamlined and effective communication across the board and how you get everybody to work together, maybe cross-departmental or maybe even in other offices to solve their problems rather than, and I guess now that you're president, it's not really going to bubble up to you that much anymore, but when you were CEO, how did you kind of push that back down?
Sure. There's two main ways that we did this. So first off, we actually implemented a corporate-wide communication system. The one that we actually started using, we actually have changed over to a new one, which we've had. I say it's new. We've had it now for several years, but it's called Workplace by Facebook. So it's very similar to Facebook, but it's all specific to just your business, and it's not connected to Facebook at all. But it has the same kind of workflow and platform like Facebook has. And in that workplace, there's different groups inside of that. Inside of that, we can disseminate information from the top down whenever we have that. But at the same time, one of the problems we had, and you're right, in the very beginning was communication, because we would try to disseminate something and it wouldn't get communicated to everybody. And we had some of our providers, right, that were trying to, stay up to date on things. We had, the managers that were trying to stay up to date on things within the clinics. And they came to us frustrated because they're like, listen, number one, our voice isn't being heard. Number two, we're not getting all the information the way we need to. So one of the things we did in the very beginning is we said, okay, every single week, we're going to have a meeting over the phone or a Zoom meeting with our team to make sure that they are on board. And at the time, I was the one that was actually managing those meetings, but I'm not anymore. But the CEO still does those, and he gets on a phone call with them. In the beginning, it was once a week, but then it got to the point where they were just kind of looking at each other and listening to each other breathe because all the communication had happened, right? And so we modified that. So we were doing that every other week, and it actually had a great impact because a lot of times just not being able to have access causes an employee or a team member to think that they are not being heard. But if they have that access and that ability to, hey, every other week, if you have a question, you have a problem, you have an issue, you have whatever, you can come to that meeting, you can bring it. It allows them to have that outlet, know that they have that outlet. It's very rare that they actually use it because, for one, they know that we're listening, they know what we're communicating, and we're going to help them if we can, right? So those are the two main things that we did is to put that communication in place by adding those meetings, because we're in 5 different locations, right? I'm in here in an executive office, and I have the 4 satellite clinics that are all around. I have one in Columbia, South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, Charleston, and North Augusta. And it's hard to get everybody to come to one place, right? But that's why it's nice about the technology that we have nowadays is you can either jump on a phone call, which is pretty easy to do on a conference call or a bridge, or go on a Zoom meeting and have those face-to-face conversations that you need to have.
Awesome. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Now, the next question that I have is, how did you know when it was the right time to elevate yourself above the CEO level and into the president level? Because now you have the team, you have a business that's operating primarily without you on a day-to-day basis, which I think is a lot of business owners' dream, right? They want to get to that level and have their team still operate and perform well. So how did you do it? And how did you know the time was right?
Sure. Both two very loaded questions, right? How I did it was really, I decided it one Friday evening, late at night. I was actually in Las Vegas at a conference, and was listening to a person speak about how you need to become the general in your business. And of course, I was thinking, I am the general. And they was like, well, the general doesn't go into the front lines, right? The general is in the back and actually, it's kind of like plays the Warren Buffett role, if you will, right? And because Warren Buffett is the ultimate general, right? That's really what he does. He checks in on his CEOs and his various companies throughout the day. And that's his main priority that he does. And so I sat back and I had never put myself in a position where I could actually think about stepping away. I always thought that I had to be there, right? But then I thought about my team and who I had in place already and who I could move around and put in different places. So my COO at the time, I promoted to my CEO. I had that conversation with him on Monday morning. And then Tuesday morning, I had on Workplace on Facebook, you actually have this Workplace Live that you could do, just like Facebook Live. And so I had a live broadcast that was scheduled out for all my 50 employees at the time. And I announced that I was stepping down from being the CEO and that the COO was being promoted, but I was still going to be in the president role and I'm not leaving. Of course, the number one question when I told them all this was, are you dying, right? Because they're thinking I have like some condition and I'm leaving and stepping down. I'm like, no, I'm not dying. I mean, I am. I mean, everybody's dying, right? But I don't have any like cancer or illness that was causing me to have to step down. But at that time, I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew it was time because I am the type of person that wants to kind of grow and expand. And I had grown and expanded the clinics to a comfort level that I really didn't want to expand past that. And otherwise, with these medical clinics, there are regulatory and compliance issues when you try to cross state lines. And I had already maxed out where I felt like I needed to be in the Carolinas or here in the South Carolina side. And so I didn't want to crest over to that next level. And so I said, this is comfort for me. The clinics are doing well. And a lot of times taking the person who put things together away and out of the picture, because my problem as an entrepreneur is I like to go in and change things and test things and modify things and do things differently. And a lot of times when you have a system that's in place and it's actually working, taking that entrepreneur out of the system and letting the system actually work and actually go forward will allow you to be able to grow and scale from that standpoint. So when I stepped out, the first probably 6 to 9 months was a little bit more challenging from a revenue standpoint. But once I had stepped out and things got figured out, we put these different systems in place with the different meetings and things like that. Things have gone really well. I mean, last year we had our best year yet as far as a revenue and income standpoint. And so it's one of those things that at the time I didn't know for sure if it was the right decision, but I just knew that what this person was speaking at this event was something I wanted to try. And my whole thought is let me try it. If it doesn't work, I can always go back, right? It's not like I can't hire myself back into the position that I took myself out of because I own the business, right? But thankfully I have a good CEO that's in position right now. He runs things on a day-to-day basis and he has been with me now going on 6 years. So he had already been with me for a couple of years when I had promoted him and he had saw our growth. I knew that he was the right person to kind of take us to that next level and being able to run things without me having to be there and to be able to run things consistently. And the next question that you had was primarily, I think, what was that next question that you had there, Brandon?
I think it was just timing and then how'd you do it?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, I didn't really know for sure why I needed to do it or how I needed to do it. I just knew that I had grown to a certain point. I was getting bored because a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're growth minded, we're vision oriented. Once we grow it to a certain point, you can sometimes get bored. And that's the state that I was in, right? And I knew I had these different systems in place and I was bored and I wanted to be able to step out. And so being able to step out allowed me to be able to figure out what was the next step for me in my career as an entrepreneur. And of course, right now, my next step has been to go into multifamily investing. And I started a private equity company called PassiveInvesting.com, where I actually acquire large multifamily assets across the Southeast.
So I love what you said about, as an entrepreneur, you are always trying to fix things, right? So even if you have a perfect system in place, you're going to still dive into that and say, yeah, this is wrong and we can make it better. I fall victim to that all the time. And I love what you said about, sometimes what a business needs is to actually remove the entrepreneur from the operations. That way they can actually just operate and get the work done. And I'd love to hear from Tom on this because Tom's worked at my firm for a while and Last year was a year of a lot of change. Actually, we probably change every 3 months, something pretty significant. And somebody on my team finally came to me and was like, I think that everybody's kind of tired of the change.
Brandon has a new idea.
Yeah, I can actually resonate with what you're saying, Dan, from both sides of the coin, both from working with Brandon and his firm. And it definitely sometimes you get to a point when the system's working and we just need to leave it alone, let it do its thing, and move on to the next phase or next project, if you will. And also me personally, I'm the same way. I feel like my biggest fear is, what if I achieve what I ultimately want? Now what, right? Then what do you do? And I just find myself doing the same thing with other things I've done in the past. There's something that's perfectly good. It's working. There's no need to touch it, but yet I have to go back and fix it, even though there's nothing broken. So definitely could see it from both angles. Kind of just switching gears a little bit, with the clinic, I know there's multiple aspects of building a business, including team building, of course. But there's also sales and marketing. Have you experienced any sales and marketing challenges as you were growing the medical practices or the clinics?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that our clinics does is we do a lot of cash-based procedures, which is called regenerative medicine, which is what we do, is a lot of PRP, prolotherapy, stem cell therapy, and there's a lot of sales that have to go on. And we don't like to, of course, in the medical field, call it sales, but if you break it down, that's exactly what it is. We're trying to sell a cash-based service to a patient that really needs it to be able to help them because their insurance company won't pay for it. Now, when it's an insurance-based, it's a lot easier of a sale because there's little to no out of pocket to a lot of those patients. But there is a lot of sales process in there, and it has been a challenge. And not even just from the sales perspective, but remember, every system in the practice, I wanted to make sure that I was the one that trained every single one of our staff because, or at least between myself and my wife, because we feel like we are the best at training, right? But I can't go into the clinics every day and train somebody that's on the front desk or that's managing patients or that is actually going in and selling a care plan, if you will, to a patient. And so one of the things that I actually did this about 6 months prior to leaving. And I didn't know I was staging this for when I left, but I was doing it because I knew we were growing to these multiple clinics and I couldn't be in all 4 clinics at the same time to train everybody. And so we put a system in place. The name of my clinics is Vitality Medical Centers. And so we started this university called Vitality Medical University. And it's an online platform that is my wife and I on training videos. And we've actually locked ourselves away for like 2 days and went to somewhere outside of our offices, outside of our house, until it was actually the local town hall had a conference room. And we rented out that conference room for 2 days. And we sat there and just recorded video after video after video on every single position in our practice. It didn't matter what it was. And we broke it down. So we didn't want to have like one long hour-and-a-half video. So we broke it down with like 3 to 5 to 7 minute videos, breaking down every little step and system and procedure. And by the time we were done, we had over 300 videos that we had done and had them modified, edited, and put up on the training platform. And even to this day, those same videos are training our staff and our team right now. And I have people now that, get hired on that I've never even met before. And then when we have our annual event that we have, they come to the office and they come to the annual event and they get to meet me for the first time. And they know me more than I know them because they get to learn about us on the videos. And it's been really, really crucial to, one, make sure that the business is being done the way we want it to be done because we're the ones training them. And then as we want to change a system or process, we don't have to re-record an hour-long video because we did them in small snippets. We can take out one video, replace it with another one, and it makes it a lot easier to be able to kind of grow and scale from that from a training standpoint.
I was literally just about to ask that. So you create 300 videos and then all of your systems change. How do you guard against that? So you created very short videos. That way you could plug and play. That's a really good idea. Now, everybody talks about systems, right? Everybody talks about systems. But what does that even mean? What is a system? Like, I think that people envision different things when they talk about systems. Like for me, I envision, pulling up the appropriate software and then clicking through it. Mm-hmm. Well, what is a system to you? Or maybe give us an example of a system that you're referencing here.
Sure. So when I talk about a system that's in place, so for me, we have our problem that we were trying to solve was we wanted to be able to train everybody. So when you have that kind of problem that's in place, how do you create a system? Meaning, how do you create that way, that list of processes, if you will, for people to follow, right? And so we could have created a couple of different systems. We could have created a book that had just a manual of all of it written out that everybody can go and look at. but we chose to do videos, which is the system that's there for people to learn and to be able to train off of. Now, in your situation, you're talking about a software, which would be a system for managing something, right? So when you talk about a software like QuickBooks or Zero Accounting or one of those other well-known accounting softwares, those are all systems as well. They're systems for doing a specific task, right? And so when you have a certain challenge or problem in place, a lot of times you have to create a new system or plug that process into the system that you already have, which is how to actually do a certain point, a certain thing.
I love everything you just said there about the training videos to the systems. That's straight gold. Is there a particular reason why you chose to do video though over the manual, over like a written manual?
I hate sitting down writing, and that was probably the number one reason. And I felt like from that going into where we are right now, it's a lot easier to get somebody to sit down and track what they can actually do. So the system that we use actually tracks the videos that they're watching, and it actually quizzes them at the end of the videos to make sure that they actually watched the content. And then we can go into the back end of the system and actually make sure that they're actually doing and following the system that we put in place, right? And we actually I'll give you a quick example as to why this is important. All of our new patient calls that come into the clinics, whether we do it via marketing or referrals, goes into one location in our admin center called our practice support center. And all the calls go into that one center. Well, that's what I call the lifeblood of our clinic, right? Those calls have to be handled effectively, efficiently, consistently, and competently. And if not, the clinic could start to suffer. And a lot of times there needs to be residual training in place for that team. When we start to see some of our numbers drop and we go back and retrain those people, it helps. But when we hire a new person to work in that practice support center, they are not allowed to be on the phones until they go through the entire training system that we have set up on the Vitality Medical University for managing those calls, handling those patients, and making sure that they're actually trained appropriately and properly. And then they have to also role play with their manager to make sure that they actually know how to handle certain situations. And we can go in the back end and track it to make sure that they actually went through all those different videos and answer the questions properly before they actually jump on a phone call.
So this is actually pretty robust. This is pretty well thought through. What is the software that you're using to track all of that?
Sure. It's a software called Lightspeed VT for virtual training. Lightspeedvt.com, I believe is it's .com. You can Google Lightspeed VT and you can find it. But it's actually a white label version. So nobody even knows that we're using Lightspeed, because when they go in, it just looks like we have a custom made, kind of Vitality Medical University. Each employee has their own login. They can go in. All the managers have certain permissions that allow them to be able to assign certain courses to the actual employee and keep track of that. And of course, in the medical side, we also have a lot of compliance things we have to have as far as bloodborne pathogens and things like that we have to have them take on an annual basis. And so we keep track of that on there, and they have to go through it, and we have that documentation in place as well.
That is great. I'm sure that people are going to be checking out Lightspeed VT real quick here. I know I am. But going to the manager case study or practice session, what are you looking for there? And what happens if they fail?
So they're going to continue to be visually trained, right? Obviously, if they go through the training and we feel like they're just not getting it, because that does happen sometimes, where if they go through the training and they just aren't being able to get it, or they just don't know how to do it properly, then we will have that conversation with them and say, listen, I don't think this is the right fit for you, and we'll let them know and we'll let them go. Right. But at the same time, the training is important, because I would say probably 95% of the people that go through that training do a really good job on the phones. Now, they're not perfect. They're not going to do things 100%. And I tell my team that. I'm like, listen, when we have a script for you, it's not because I want you to read off the script. I want you to still have a conversation with these patients. But there's a flow there on purpose. We want to make sure that you hit those certain high points on that script so we can make sure that we are efficiently transitioning that patient into the clinics. Because at the end of the day, if you don't handle those patients properly, it looks poorly on the provider that's in that clinic as well. And that happens with lots of different businesses, right? So let's just take it for example, like a plumber, right? It's a really basic example, but it's a very vital piece of our communities is having plumbers. Well, if you call a plumber's office and you try to schedule an appointment, and they're kind of fumbling back and forth, they don't really know what they're doing, they're kind of figuring out how to schedule you or whatever, and it's not a very good experience. what's your thought about that plumber coming to your house, right? And it works the same way. And so that first touch and that first contact is really important. And that's why we spend a lot of time training those frontline team members on making sure that they handle those calls properly and effectively and efficiently and competently and consistently bring those patients in.
I couldn't agree more with what you just said there about that first contact and making sure it's done right and why people need to be trained. You know, I've been in sales positions and I've seen that, and that's how I was trained when I was in a sales position. But just kind of wanted to ask a question. When you determine someone's not the right fit, right? When you realize this person's just not the right fit, how do you have that conversation with them? How do you let them down gently, if you will?
Yeah. Well, there's two different ways to do it. So if they've been with us for a little bit of a longer time, so past their probationary period, which is usually 90 days, we usually give them. If they're past their probationary period and we're just seeing that either they're just kind of gone off of where our training is, they're just not getting back, we've had multiple, conversations with them and documented everything, then, we'll have that conversation with them. And the conversation that I'd like to have, I haven't done it in a while now, for several years, and actually fired somebody. But the conversation that I train our managers to have is, listen, at the end of the day, we're holding you back from doing what you're actually called to do, what you're meant for. And you continue to be in this position is going to continue to hold you back. So we don't have to continue to hold you back from where you really need to be. We've decided to let you go because we just don't feel like this is working anymore, right? That's an easy way to let them off so that they know that, hey, we're not just trying to get ourselves off of having that employee, but we're also trying to make sure that they understand that it's the best fit for them too, right? And a lot of times, if you've ever fired anybody, you usually are working yourself up more than anything else. And when you go and actually let that person go, you're like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, right? But that first couple of fires, that usually is that thought process. And you stay up the night before and trying to figure out, what if they get mad at me? What if they throw something at me? All these different things go through your head. But that's one of the easiest ways to let somebody go. And I had a good friend of mine that kind of told me that kind of strategy earlier on. And it really does help to be able to let somebody go. But once your managers figure that out, then when you try to let a manager go and you tell them, well, I just feel like we're holding you back, they kind of already get that picture, right?
They're like, tell me the real reason, Dan. What?
Yeah, exactly. So,
all right. So you mentioned the probationary period, and I kind of want to just talk about that for a second, because we have a probationary period too for any new hires. What does a probationary period mean? What expectations do you put in place? And if they are not met, how short of a rope is that person on?
Sure. So there's a couple of things at play here. So for one, we actually are in a right to work state. So unless there's a contract in place, then obviously we can hire and fire for any reason. So not for any reason. Obviously, if you do it for certain reasons, you could obviously, have some litigation at hand and stuff like that. But you do have that extra flexibility. But we basically set up front and say, listen, we're going to put a 90-day probationary period. Doesn't mean you're in a bad spot or anything like that. But if for any reason in the first 90 days, you don't like what you're doing, or we don't like you working with us, no harm, no foul. We'll just talk to each other and we'll part ways, right? That's how we do that. So one of the things that we are looking at is obviously how they're interacting with the other people in the office, because you can have one person that's that bad apple, if you will, and it ruins the entire clinic. Right. And also we have certain, like I said before, we have certain training in place. And so if they are consistently not performing based on what they've been trained on, then they're going to be, let go, because that's part of the process. And especially in the medical field, when if they don't follow a certain process or system and, they're recapping needles when they shouldn't be, and they should be just tossing those away in the sharps container, those are big liabilities for the clinics, and we just can't have that. So there are definitely certain criteria like that in our training that if they don't follow those certain things, then they will be let go right away.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that could be a tough conversation if that's the first time that you're ever having that conversation. And I don't even mean the firing conversation. I just mean the expectation setting conversation. I know a lot of business owners that do not clearly set expectations with their employees. Heck, that was me probably a year ago. And my big goal for 2020 is just to add so much clarity to my organization that the fate of everybody's jobs is in their own hands. And that makes me feel good, because then you get to say, hey, I told you very, very clearly. You agreed to it. It was all laid out. It was super crystal clear what you needed to do to be successful and what would constitute you no longer having a job here. That's the level that I'm trying to get to. And it sounds like you kind of figured that out. But that's a really tough thing for business owners, because I mean, the first few years that I've been running my business, I didn't really know what expectations to tell anybody. It's just kind of like the expectations that we need to sell more tax returns so that we can all eat. And that was very basic. And then as you start building that team out, you start running into problems like, well, person A over here isn't pulling their weight. Well, what do you mean isn't pulling their weight? What is the expectation that person A had? And does person A even know that that expectation exists? And then you start asking those questions, diving in, and you realize, man, I, as a leader, have done a really poor job here setting expectations, just setting those super clear expectations. So how do you add that clarity to your organization? And how do you show somebody exactly what they need to do to be successful in their role?
Well, I think one of the most important things that you need to do, which is, one of the things that we've implemented in our clinics, is being able to put together annual reviews or biannual reviews or even quarterly reviews. And I think, the position that you're in where you have a lot of virtual employees, you have to have a lot more of those conversations and to have a lot more of those kind of metrics in place because you're not having a lot of that day-to-day insight and interaction as to how they're actually working. And so it can be a little more challenging. But in our clinics, obviously, we have certain KPIs that each one of the clinics are supposed to be hitting and performing at. Right. And when they're not, we know that there's an issue. We know that there's problems. And so, for example, each one of our managers knows what their revenue goals are for the month. They know what their collection goals are for the month. They know what their TSRs, the total services renders, are per month because we know what our collection ratios are. And we know how many, types of patients that we want to be able to see in those different clinics. And so if they're not hitting those certain numbers, that's a big red flag for us, or I guess I'd say yellow flag. It's not a red flag yet, unless they have multiple yellow flags that are not performing. Then it can turn into a red flag, which would be we need to talk about if this is the right position for you.
No, great answer. And setting expectations, as Brendan said, and as you had mentioned, is super important. I just want to switch gears. So this is a question that we ask everybody who comes on this podcast. And it's, did you have a challenge that was so difficult, so treacherous that you almost gave up, you almost quit? And if you had that challenge, what was that challenge and how did you overcome it?
Well, I will tell you that when we scaled from 1 clinic to 2 clinics, I was really excited about it because I was like, all right, we did some test marketing in the sub-market that we were going to be opening up into the second clinic. And we got great results for people having to drive an hour and a half to come see us. And we knew that if we opened up a clinic an hour and a half away, we would have a good number of patients coming to that clinic. And oddly enough, it did really well. Like we were like 80% booked the first week that we had opened up because we had started the marketing a week to 2 weeks before and filled up the schedule and started working in that clinic. I took my entire corporate team to that location to really, grow it and get it started. And, guess what happened? The first clinic started to tank, started to go down. And of course, when we first find this out, we were looking at the numbers on a quarterly basis. And at that time, it was fine, right? Because we had 1 clinic. We were there on a day-to-day basis. We were watching those numbers, but we were also doing quarterly reviews on the actual numbers and the KPIs. Well, when we grew to that second clinic, we took our eye off of that. Until the quarterly report came in. And then it was way too late. We had already dropped significantly from where we really needed to be. And so I got to the point there where I was like, do I even really want to open up another clinic, right? Because my goal was to open up 4 clinics. And I was like, I don't even know if I want to open up that third one now. And it actually took us a year to open up the third one because I had to put in some additional procedures and additional systems in place to make sure that we were watching the numbers, not on a quarterly basis, not on a monthly basis, but on a weekly basis, which is what we do now. And we still do that. And it's not just the financial numbers, it's a lot of the other metrics that we have in our clinic for making sure that we have a certain number of x-rays being done and a certain number of injection procedures and certain durable medical equipment being dispensed. And there's a lot of different metrics that we're keeping track of. And that was what took me that year to kind of put into place, is trying to figure out what those really were and how I can have my management team in multiple places at the same time. And that's also when we decided that we really needed to start to put this whole chain of command into place in a better way so that we could actually be able to open up that third and fourth clinic. But after I opened up that third clinic, we opened up the fourth one within 3 months of opening up the third one, because we already had the systems in place when we scaled from 1 to 2. To go from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 was pretty simple.
How long did it take you to open up that third one after the second one? What was that?
It was a year. So we opened up the second clinic, and then it took us a year to open up the third one. And then it was 3 months later that we were able to open up the fourth one.
So you opened the second clinic. You're riding this high, right? The entrepreneur high.
Yep.
You get the quarterly numbers and your first clinic's tanked. What are you thinking at that point?
Well, I mean, I was blaming myself because I was like, I know I shouldn't have stopped looking at that, right? And it wasn't anybody's fault but my own because I knew that I shouldn't have. I've just taken my eye off of that. But we were so focused, like you said, as an entrepreneur, we were so focused on that new venture and that new clinic that we kind of lost sight of that first one. And it was interesting because when we started talking to the staff that was in that clinic, they sensed it as well. And that sensing from the staff that we were not there and didn't really care about them was also one of the reasons that also caused that clinic to tank, because they thought we were putting all of our focus and attention on the new clinic and didn't really care much about them at all.
Interesting. So there was a cultural hit too,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of have to think about the culture of each office that you open.
Yep.
You know, it's funny, just to kind of point out the same lines as we're doing this new staying power stuff. I still have responsibilities in other aspects of the accounting firm. And I'm very mindful to ask myself, am I still able to keep up with those responsibilities while starting this new venture? So I just want to say it's funny that you said that. And it's just something you have to be very cognizant of, not to get too far away from the core business, right? They say don't, I forgot what the saying is. It's like, it's just something about don't forget the core business, stick to the basics, stick to what's working right now, basically something along those lines. But I wanted to ask you another question along these lines. When you face these challenges, when you come across these big tests, who do you lean on for support? Who do you go to help you get through some of these bigger issues?
Sure. So I would say that there are three key people that I've surrounded myself with over the years that have really helped me. Number one is my wife. I have a cup of coffee in the morning every single day, and we sit down and spend time with each other and talking about what happened the day before, what happened during the day, what's going to happen in the next 24 hours and things like that. And that would be my number one. But I also have a good friend of mine out of Florida who is in a similar position that I am as far as clinics are concerned. And him and I have been getting together and having a mini 2-person mastermind, usually 3 or 4 times a year. And I still even do it now. And we get together and actually brainstorm on ways that we can improve our businesses and improve our practices. And a lot of times because we have similar clinics, he's testing one thing in his clinic when I'm testing something in my clinic. And even right now with the current COVID-19 issues, we're trying to transition our clinics into a telemedicine model type clinics to be able to mitigate some of the risks of lost revenue due to decrease in patient flow. And he's testing things right now that I'm also testing things up here, and we're collaborating back and forth, and we have that constant communication that it allows us to be able to kind of bounce ideas off of each other and have that mastermind. And we also not just over the phone and via Zoom, but we actually go away and actually focus on the businesses. And so usually that 3 or 4 times a year we're actually going away, and we're supposed to go next week to Las Vegas for 3 days and just get away and focus. But obviously because of the travel ban and stuff like that, we're not able to do that. And they've, of course, shut down the entire Las Vegas Strip right now too. But we get together and really focus on things. And I think having a key person like that's in a similar position to you is really important, because as entrepreneurs, a lot of times we're kind of on this like isolated island, and nobody really understands where we're at because a lot of your friends are in the W-2 position and don't actually run their own business. Or maybe you go to church like I do, and I don't have a lot of people at church that can actually relate to me because they're not at that same level. And it's very hard to have those conversations. And going to church and telling somebody, hey, my revenue just dropped by $30,000 this month, and they just made that their entire year. If they can't relate to that kind of a conversation, it's hard when you don't have somebody that you can surround yourself with to be able to have those conversations. And then the third person I would say is actually my father-in-law, who is a very wise man. And I actually knew him really well before I even knew my wife very well before we got married. But he's been a great confidant as well, and be able to ask and really advice from a personal standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, if you will, and saying, hey, here's a situation where I'm dealing with right now. Can you give me some idea? I kind of bounce some ideas off of you and get some insight and input and things like that. And somebody who has that experience managing people and understanding the human psyche is really important, because that's when you can actually start to really grow your team, and you actually understand and put yourself in your team's shoes and seeing things from their perspective and not always just yours.
Is your wife involved in your businesses at all?
She is. So right now, she 2 days a week is going in and does some residual training, and also does some fill-in work. And she also works very closely with our staff accountant for the end of the year books and quarterly finances as well.
The reason I ask is your comment about entrepreneurs being on an island. I mean, that's something that I say all the time to all my entrepreneur friends, and they all get it. But then spouses sometimes can not be as supportive as you're referencing because they don't get it. It's like your church example. Like you can come home and say, man, just lost a $20,000 deal. And they're like, all right, it's like, no, I need some help. This is painful.
Well, I will tell you though, Brandon, that one of the main reasons why I wanted to involve my wife earlier on, which, thankfully she wanted to be involved, but one of the main reasons why I wanted her involved in the very beginning is because if something ever happened to me, she could run the business. She doesn't need me to continue to run the business. She knows how I think. She knows how I want things done. And I have very good, high confidence that she could actually run the business. Even if I passed away today, she would still be able to do that. And that's a really good assurance for her and confidence builder for her, because she knows that if something does ever happen, she's going to be well taken care of.
Yeah, that's really smart. It's funny, actually. My wife just joined our team about a couple of weeks ago. She's been helping out with some of the sales side and project management, which is it's been a cool experience so far. I mean, the conversations have definitely shifted towards that more supportive feel. So that's why I was asking. It's like, man, I can kind of feel it in my own relationship at this point too. That's a smart idea. Involve your spouse so that, there's obviously risks to involving your spouse, right? Your conversations could just become all about business and nothing else. And the question is, how strong is that relationship at the end of the day, if that's the way that it goes? It could also lead to a lot of fights and issues. And potentially, if there's a divorce, there could be some financial implications. But if you feel good about it, and if you take your approach of, hey, look, if something happens to me, I want you to be able to step into my shoes and run things. I love it. I think that's a great strategy for not only your business continuity, but also just your spouse's confidence in what you do. And maybe they can see your pain every once in a while, huh?
They definitely see the pain for sure, whenever things happen. And I would say that, there can be a fine balance when and trying to talk about it too much. But as an entrepreneur, and if you're a spouse of an entrepreneur, you have to understand that their passion in life is being an entrepreneur. And I'll give you an example. I grew up not watching sports. Like my parents, my dad, my mom, we never watched TV on sports or anything. I never had a team or anything like that. Football, baseball, basketball, soccer, whatever it was. I didn't have one. And when I met my wife, she was a big sports fan, like to the point where when we had our first child in the hospital, the nurses just changed shifts every 12 hours. And they would look at me because it was in November and she was watching college football. They would look at me and go, "Are you seriously watching football and your wife is in labor?" I'm like, "You could turn it off for all I care. She's the one that wants to watch it." And of course they'd look at her and go, she'd go, yeah, that's what I want, But to me, that wasn't a passion for me, but I made it my passion because she's my wife, right? And I think that a lot of spouses have to understand that the passion that your spouse has, who is that entrepreneur, that is their passion. And you need to get on board with that passion and start to love them for that passion. And that's what my wife has done. And I've done for her as well. And we're not perfect, right? But I'm just telling you one of the things that we've done that has helped our relationship. And it's stronger than ever before because we actually are starting to actually enjoy what the other person is passionate about. And being on board with that is very important.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're totally right. Entrepreneurs, they love being an entrepreneur. That's their hobby. That's their job. That's their livelihood, their goals. Everything is entrepreneurship, building it, running it, figuring out the problems. I had another accountant that I had looked up to when I was starting my business. He was running his and I was like, should I really start my own business? And he was like, look, when it's up, it's up. When it's down, it's down. But when it's down, they're my problems and I get to solve them. It's not a big company or anything like that. It's all on me. And even when it's down, it's still fun. It's maybe not fun in that minute, but at the end of the day, you're going to look back on that and go, man, that was great. What an awesome experience to go through all these skills that I've learned. And I guess what I'm coming full circle to is that you're right. The entrepreneur, it is their everything. And for me specifically, my wife and I, I'm always on. And by that, I mean, I'm always thinking. I'm always thinking about something to the point where I've tried to leave my phone outside of the house so that I'm not on my phone and so that we can connect. But then even when we were trialing that, what I realized and what we talked about, my wife and I, what I realized is it doesn't matter because I'm still thinking about it and I'm still strategizing and planning and considering and problem solving and it's just something that you almost just have to say this is it, this is who I am, so let's figure this out together. But yeah, definitely interesting. So potentially even involving your spouse in your interests, getting them to work in your business could also potentially help with those conversations too, I think.
Yep. Absolutely. And I would a second to every single one of those things that you said, because even if you try to put it down or try to not think about it, sometimes that can be worse because now you're thinking about what you should be thinking about, right? And it's more problems.
Yeah, you put it down and now you're like, okay, well, wait a second. I thought that this was supposed to happen around this time, and now I'm wondering if it did happen or didn't. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to ask you one more question before we wrap up. And I think this is a genius idea, which you did, Dan, by the way. It appears what you have done is that you have created an operating business, the medical clinics, and you have take a step out like we discussed here on the podcast today. Now you have a CEO running it. Now you run Handford Capital and passiveinvesting.com on what I believe to be a full-time basis. And that allows you to now build a portfolio of multifamily properties and take advantage of all that has to offer. Would you be able to just talk about that for a quick second? What made you decide to take that step back and go into this other business on a more full-time basis?
Yeah, I would say the number one reason why I decided to go into the multifamily real estate business and start in this private equity company, which is called the passiveinvesting.com, is that I wanted to start to find a way to take advantage of the tax laws that are out there to allow me to be able to reduce my taxable liability, because I was writing really large six-figure checks to the government and I was tired of doing that. And my wife was as well. She was the one that was nagging me the most because she's the one that was doing most of those finances on a quarterly basis. And she'd come to me and complain about how much more we're paying in taxes. And I would always encourage her. I'd always say, well, more money we pay in taxes means we're making more money. So it's okay, right? But when I stepped away, that was one of the passions that I had never been able to do, is really invest in real estate, because I was so busy putting out fires. And so I was able to, continue to grow my clinics with me not being there, and also be able to start this other venture where I can help other business owners and other entrepreneurs that are looking for ways to diversify their portfolios and being able to invest in large multifamily assets that are usually reserved for institutional investors like your REITs and your hedge funds, to be able to invest alongside them and grow our wealth, what I call legacy wealth, for our children. And so that's one of the things that I decided to do. And I help a lot of entrepreneurs in that realm too, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't have the flexibility of being able to step away like I do, or maybe they don't want to, but they still want to have that, take advantage of, being able to invest in real estate. And that's a vehicle that I'm actually able to provide for them now.
Thank you for explaining that, because I thought that the entire way you went about that it was just absolutely genius. So we're coming up on time. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on today's show. What is the best way for our listeners to learn more about you and what you have going on?
Sure. So you can obviously go to our website, passiveinvesting.com, find out more information about us there. If you want to shoot me an email, you have something you want to talk to me about personally, one-on-one, glad to do that too. You can shoot me over an email, dan@passiveinvesting.com, and glad to have that conversation with anybody who's listening now as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. Looking forward to releasing it. Another phenomenal episode right here.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with other business owners who may be facing their own growth challenges. And if you own a professional services firm, consider joining our private community. The Staying Power Collective is a community where owners of accounting, law, and consulting firms discuss best practices for running and growing virtual businesses. You'll get access to our Slack group, and you'll have a Zoom meeting once a month with a small group of other firm owners. To apply for the group, head on over to www.stayingpowercollective.com and fill out the brief form. And if you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or if you have general questions or feedback, shoot us an email at contact@stayingpowercollective.com. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great rest of your week.